All right, Senator Hoeven.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Dr. Califf, you mentioned the top to bottom review. When do you expect it to begin? And then I trust you'll be sharing it with Congress as well, correct?
I think a lot of people are going to be watching this, and in an interview I did yesterday, I pointed out that we have a lot of bosses. Mr. Yanis said the public. I agree with that. You guys are our bosses. We can't make the kind of changes we're going to need without your agreement. So I don't see it as just informing you. I think we're going to have to iterate about what we're finding and what you believe. And we're also part of the executive branch, so we got a lot of masters there that we have to satisfy. We're going to start as soon as we get the contracting done. The people that do the work are going to put a lot of time and effort into it. So we're working on that right now through the Reagan-Udall Foundation, and then we're committed to having a report within 60 business days of the time that the work begins.
Okay, thank you. Budget transparency. Also, I brought up the Food Safety Modernization Act and both performance before and after. Can you incorporate into your budgeting process or reporting process how you are trying to implement that flexibility and improve your processes? Will that be part of this review as well?
Short answer is yes. I will say I've worked in just about every kind of organization. The federal agency budgets, I would say, are among the more difficult to decipher because of the mixed mission and sort of all these things come into play. But I think on the food side, one thing about the user fees on the medical product side is it brings a discipline to the budget that's very clear. Which has some value. We don't have that on the food side, but we are committed to making the budget much more transparent and understandable.
So, Mr. Yanis, and I know I talked to Dr. Califf about this as well. I know you're trying to use technology to create a safer food supply, a more traceable food supply, and all that kind of thing. You've worked with large companies. I certainly understand how they can implement the IT to do that kind of thing. But there's a lot of small companies out there. How are they going to be part of this effort? I mean, and it seems like a very worthy effort, but how are they going to have the resource base to do this?
Well, thank you for that question, and you're right. We have to be very cognitive of this. You've acknowledged we want to use technologies such as machine learning to strengthen our predictive capabilities. We have an interest in leveraging technologies such as distributed ledger to see if we can track and trace foods faster. But we have to be cognitive and very careful of what we ask or require of the industries that we regulate. And so we're taking that into consideration. Let me give you one quick example of how we're doing that. I think many of you know we have a proposed food traceability out. When we issued that proposed food traceability rule, it was just for certain foods that are most likely to be involved in foodborne outbreaks, number one. Number two, when we proposed the rule, we said that the records can be kept for each node in the system, not for the entire continuum, but for each node, and it can be kept on paper. So we're not requiring that it be kept digitally. We've carved out exemptions for small food producers and for small retailers. And so we're being cognitive. We do know that some in the food industry, as the food industry becomes increasingly digitized, because it's happening, it hasn't happened real quickly as it's happened in other industries because of the margins in food. But it's going to happen because it drives efficiencies. As that happens, we have to be careful that we don't create what I call a digital divide. And so one of the things we did just last year, we did something that was a little bit less traditional. We didn't write rules, we didn't write guidance, but we held what we called a food traceability challenge, and we called it a low to no cost food traceability challenge. Let me emphasize it was low to no cost. We know that data can be digitized. We've been digitizing data for decades. But we went out to food traceability solution providers and we said, can you create solutions that are low to no cost so they can scale for food producers at all sizes? And our call to action was answered in a big way. We had over 90 submissions representing 12 countries around the world. We've selected winners. And a lot of the solutions are low to no cost. If you think about social media platforms, many of us are in them. How much do you pay to participate? Most of us, none, because they've created economic models that allow those solutions to scale. And so rest assured that we're very careful of this, and we won't require something on food producers that's not doable, and we'll make sure that our food safety policies and rules are sustainable and that they can be executed by food producers of all sizes.
Thank you. Yeah, appreciate that answer. Clearly, something you've been thinking about, and that's
Yes, sir.
good. Dr. Califf, this relates a little bit to what you're talking to Tester about, but there are 21 federal agencies that all have different programs, standards, requirements, recommendations, suggestions, I mean, you name it, but they all want to kind of tell you how you ought to improve your diet to make you more healthy, okay? Well, that can create a lot of challenges out there for a lot of folks, like school nutritionists, for example, who I think know quite a bit about nutrition and what those school children should eat, will eat, won't eat. And sometimes all these, mandates from on high where somebody just knows how all 300+ million folks ought to eat every day, create some real challenges out there. As lead agency on food safety, how do you kind of weigh in on that and kind of rationalize the thing in a way that works for consumers and for the folks, the professionals out there that are trying to do it, but you still got to give people choice and discretion. And, they might want to eat Mississippi shrimp or they might want to eat South Carolina shrimp. And so they should be informed, but they should also have their choice.
I'm going to turn to Dr. Main, but let me just say, she and I remember going back 2015, have arguments about this on the scientific basis of how you derive the conclusions that you need to derive. Because you could write a book about just about any diet now and sell it to a lot of people. Might not be good for any of them, but Dr. Main is in charge of this. The food labeling effort is just an amazing. I just think of it in my lectures between my stints at FDA. I said, you got a space about this big to inform 320 million people who speak different languages and have different levels of education. It's a big task.
Yeah.
So I'd say we are very committed to doing what you just said, which is empowering consumers with information. We want consumers to have the information they need to make those types of choices. And labeling is a key tool. And you mentioned 21 federal agencies, but only a few of them are regulatory, like FDA. And so we do have some unique levers to really help empower consumers with information. So that's a key part of what we do. In terms of consumer choice, we agree with consumer choice. We're trying to support innovation throughout the food supply, but to make sure those products are safe and that they're properly labeled so consumers do have those choices. In terms of the foundation of dietary recommendations, that is the dietary guidelines process. That is a joint process that is done every 5 years. It's a partnership between the U.S. Department of Agriculture and Health and Human Services. We do play a role in that as part of HHS, but all the federal dietary guidance derives from the dietary guidelines process that occurs every 5 years.
How about standards of identity? In one case, there's one that dates back to 1988. How are we making sure that these standards of identity those decisions are being made, they're being made well, and they're being made more timely?
Thank you for that. Should I take that one?
Please.
Yes, thank you for that question.
My next one's going to be Mississippi and South Carolina shrimp, so it's going to get tougher after this one, too.
Yeah. There are a large number of standards of identity. Some of them definitely need to be updated, and we have some petitions that we've been working our way through, and we are very committed to updating, modernizing standards of identity, and where appropriate, creating new standards of identity. We have some requests to create new standards of identity, for example. But one of the challenges with regard to standards of identity, it is not designed to be an agile process. This process to update a standard of identity involves rulemaking, and rulemaking always takes time. Mm-hmm. And with certain standards of identity, it involves formal rulemaking, which is in some ways an even more complicated process. So it's not a quick process. The other piece is, as we work to update a standard of identity, it's really critical that we have extensive stakeholder engagement to understand the practices that are used by the folks who are making those standardized foods so that the modernized standard of identity really reflects what's in there. So we are very committed to doing that. We are making progress on that. We appreciate new resources that we have received from you all.
Provided. Yep.
Yes, this has been a very under-resourced area in CFSAN, one of the most under-resourced in the past, and that created a backlog, like the 1988 one that you mentioned. But with the new resources, we've been able to hire 13 new people. We have 5 new recruits that we are working to get through the process. I will mention that the Foods Program does not have the Cures hiring authority that is as agile as the medical products, so it takes us longer to get those new hires on board. So we know we've had conversations with many of you about hiring authorities that the medical product centers have. If the Foods Program had those same hiring authorities, your resources would translate into bodies on board more quickly in the Foods
I
Program.
appreciate that. That's a good recommendation, and I'm glad you brought up the additional funding. I was going to do it. You did. Good for you. The flexibility hiring authority is something that we should look into. I appreciate that recommendation. This is a challenging area. I'm sure that the chairman can tell you, you know, for example, milk products, you know. So, but a very important area. So thank you for your response.